In the last 23 years, Carl Kasgaard and Halifax 57 Rescue have accomplished some incredible achievements in aviation. From a world record lift from Lake Mjøs in Norway to the recovery from a forest in Harrodsburg in Belgium, Halifax 57 Rescue is well known and respected for its work honoring our veterans. From Canada and Malta to Great Britain and Sweden, this international organization is based in Nanton, Alberta and Dunrobin, Ontario. Halifax NA337 has been restored and resides at the RCAF Trenton Museum in Ontario. Halifax LW682 has been used for parts and the aluminum melted down into ingots. These ingots can be found in RCAF plaques in Florida, Colorado, and at the War Memorial in Richmond, Virginia. General Hood, RCAF Commander.
As Commander of the Air Force, I'm going to graciously accept the kind donation from the Halifax 57 project of ingots from a 426 Halifax that was crashed. And these ingots represent a large part of our history in our Air Force. It represents an aircraft that most of the Canadians in Bomber Command would have flown, and it recognizes the sacrifice, commitment of all those young men those many years ago. It's my intent as we transition back to our old wings to use some of this metal from that 426 Halifax and put them in the new wings we're creating for the Royal Canadian Air Force. If you come here, Scott, you can see our previous wings were gold in nature, and we're going back to our roots and recreating them in silver. So all of our wings across the Air Force will be silver, and all of them will contain a certain amount of this great donation from you that I'm forever grateful for. Thank you.
Two locations in England, the Bomber Command Memorial in London's Green Park, features LW682 ingots in its ceiling, and a special plaque made from the ingots as part of the Bomber Command Centre in Lincoln, Lincolnshire, the home of many Bomber Command bases. From British Columbia, Halifax Hercules engines have been restored and are on display in Nanton. In the last 2 years, efforts have been made to continue the objectives of finding and rebuilding a second Halifax for Canada. This Halifax will be displayed at the Bomber Command Museum in Nanton, Alberta. We have two rebuild shops, one in Nanton and one in Ottawa, with Scott Knox and Knox Technology.
Welcome again to the Rebuild Shop. Just a quick update. Since we last spoke to you, we've been focusing on rebuilding one of the main ribs. We still have to clean up the old surfaces here, get them ready for priming, but they're more or less fully intact. There's a few little areas of corrosion, but nothing really to be worried about. So this rib will be able to easily withstand the static forces that's going to be required when it's sitting on its feet at Nanton. So I've taken an old piece of U-channel from phase 1 and repurposed it as a very long skill saw, or a jig to hold the skill saw. And what this is going to allow us to do is I've got a metal blade on this skill saw, which should cut the material quite nicely. And I can make nice, long, straight cuts with this, so I can actually, once this is all jigged up, I can reprofile by removing some of the material on the extrusions, get them into the shape that we need for the next phase of the rear spar.
In Sweden, we have discovered another Halifax, and SC divers are part of the recovery effort. Their recovery team arrived in Trenton to see the impressive Halifax NA337.
Can I start?
Wow. Is that big enough for you?
Gee, it's so big. I like that. That's a good word.
The cockpit window is 21 feet off the ground.
Since then, engines have been recovered, and we await the next step to this incredible aviation adventure. In the future, the work of Halifax 57 Rescue will be remembered for its volunteers, friends, sponsors, and associates for their work in preserving Canadian and world aviation history.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. 15 RCAF squadrons flew heavy bombers in World War II, and they did over 43,000 trips, 43,000 missions, those 15 squadrons. And there's all the different squadrons. And the Halifax that's underwater is the RCAF 405 squadron. So that's just the Canadian contribution to Bomber Command. And they weren't whistling Dixie. And when it was all done, this group of 15 squadrons had the highest serviceability rate and the lowest combat loss rate in all of World War II, in all of British Bomber Command. Canadians excelled. Now, let's look at the 3 top World War II missions done by the Royal Canadian Air Force. And you got to look at what we're trying to prove is the Halifax is important to Canada. So there you have at the top, October 14th, during the day, the Canadians launched 258 heavy bombers. Grand total. 218 of those 258 were Halifaxes. That's 84% of the force. These are the 3 top missions in all of World War II. And then at night, they went out on the night of the 14th again, which is just stunning that they could rearm, refuel, and go out again, and they did. And they put up 239 bombers 12 hours later. And once again, look at how many Halifaxes were used by the Royal Canadian Air Force. 239 Lancasters were used by the Royal Canadian Air Force. That's 83% of the entire Canadian bomber force was Halifax. And then the super duper raid, the greatest effort ever by the Royal Canadian Air Force in World War II, all those Canadian squadrons in Bomber Command in England, they put up 293 bombers and 248, 84% were Halifaxes. There's Oscar, and I knew one of the guys that flew Oscar in 424 Squadron, Mel Compton, and he's gone now, but we're trying to build up a Halifax for Mel and his buddies. There's a close-up of Oscar. And I think it ended up with, hang on, go back. It ended up with like over 80 bombing missions without being shot down. Okay, during World War II, RCAF bomber squadrons flew 43,381 trips. And there's the sacrifice of the Canadians. Halifaxes, they flew 66% of all the bombing missions. They lost 546 bombers with 7 guys in each bomber. The Lancaster, we lost 199, and from the beginning, our very beginnings, we flew Wellingtons, and we lost 147. So you're starting to pick up the numbers here, and you're starting to see the significance. Trying to get the slide to go again. Come on, baby. Okay, and here's Carl Kajarsgaard. After we lifted the Halifax out of 740 feet of water from a lake in Norway in 1995. And that was a happy day. And you can see the steel lifting device. We use whatever it dang well takes to get the job done. So we modify and we adapt as we go along, and that's the Canadian way. Now there's the Halifax pulled out of the lake, totally restored, and some of the veterans that were there in 2005 for the dedication of the Halifax. It's the most technically correct restoration of a Halifax ever. And I went to Malta to research a Spitfire pilot that flew with Buzz Burling. He was a Canadian Bud Connell from Vancouver. And when I was there, the guy at the museum said, Carl, you're trying to find Halifax parts, aren't you? And I said, yes, we're looking all over the world. He said, there's some big chunks of a Hastings in a scrapyard just down the street here. Isn't the wing of a Hastings the wing of a Halifax? Yeah, I said, yeah, it's almost identical. And he said, oh, well, let's go down to the scrapyard and you can have a look at these chunks of wing that are in the scrapyard. So, long story short, we bought everything for $1 a pound, and that is the beginning of a new Halifax for Canada. So this is the backbone, this is the beginnings, this is called the center section. So you see where I'm standing, just outside to our right of where I'm standing, that's where the inboard engine attaches to the main spar. You see the fittings there? Now go to the other far end of the center section, that's where the other inboard engine attaches to the main spar. So that's a starter kit. So we got all of this back to Canada, and that's in Ottawa. So just to give you a rundown, everything you see in red, we've got the beginnings of it. We got the center section. We don't have the outer wing panels yet, but I found one in England, and the Royal Air Force is going to give us an outer wing panel. You see, we've got the tail turret at the back, we've got the nose cone at the front, and you see how the propeller blades are in white? That means we don't have it. But just wait, there's more, because I'm leaving for England on Sunday night, and I'm gonna be looking at some propeller blades that we thought didn't exist for a Halifax. There we are at the rebuild shop in Ottawa, Scott Knox at Knox Tech. You see how the main spar has been totally rebuilt? We had brand new main spar assembly made for us, and then we dovetailed everything together. Main spar at the top, wing ribs, rebuilt wing ribs attached at there. And you see on the right-hand side of those giant wing ribs, do you see the piece that's kind of attached just down low? That's the rear spar. And we've got 2 sets of rear spars for 2 Halifaxes made for us by Sprung Corporation in Alderside at their aluminum alloy factory. So we're getting assistance. There's Scott and Harry. They're the 2 main guys at the shop, and they've just attached these wing ribs. There's 10 wing ribs along a 30-foot section, and those wing ribs are 8 feet long. So you can see on the floor, on the far right of the photograph, are the brand new rear spars that attach to the rear side of the ribs. So, you know, Johnny Cash, one piece at a time, and we're making it work. The cost for working, Scott charges us a fixed price to do the main spar, a fixed price to do the wing ribs, and the cost is shared between Halifax 57 Rescue 50-50 with the Bomber Command Museum of Canada. And we greatly appreciate their support as a group, because they want a Halifax sitting beside their Lancaster one day. There's the rear spars, just been delivered from the factory in Oregon to us at Ottawa. It truly is a worldwide effort, and there's so many people helping us. There, at the scrapyard in Malta, you can see we found main gear legs for a Halifax, and we got 4. When we opened up the wing, all the main gear, the magnesium casting, the gear arch, the axles, the wheels, the tires, they were all tucked inside the wing. So we got 4 main gears. and that gives us the freedom to make 2 rebuilt for a Halifax. That's Mario and one of his buddies. I think that's Rick, but I'm not sure about that guy. And back in the corner, you can see we found a Bristol Hercules parts engine in the scrapyard, and that's worth its weight in gold, even for parts. There's yours truly with our pet monster on the left, and there are 2 brand new Bristol Hercules engines. You see the propeller on the front of the engine. I was in Leeds, England, and I bought the propeller so we could put it on our engine. And he said, my buddy's got 4 Bristol Hercules engines in his shop north of Leeds. He might sell them. So I went up there, and he had 2 engines that were parts engines, and they were kind of like, they weren't really too good. And I said, well, we want to run our engines on our Halifax, so we need Bristol Hercules engines that are in reasonable condition. And he said, oh, you should have a look at the 2 brand new ones in factory crates over in the corner. So we bought both engines for $16,000 grand total, $8,000 a piece. But you could spend $16,000 on each engine just getting it to run. These are zero-time engines that have been pickled. That is, there's grease and oil inside those cylinders. There's our buddies in Sweden, and they're going out in their diving boats, and you see the water there. Do you see how calm it is? You know what? For Sweden, right there, do you know what that water is? That's called glass. That's how rough the water is. This is classified as glassy water conditions. So that's the diving guys working. You see the red buoy on the left in front of the black boat? That's the Halifax, underwater off the coast of Sweden, 10 miles off in 50 feet. So the divers went down, and this was over a year ago, and they were inspecting and plotting and getting everything ready. So, but you can see the biggest boat there is not very big, and the waves can pick up to 4 or 5 feet very quickly in that area. And as soon as it gets over about 4 feet, the divers cannot dive with boats that size. That's why, if you've noticed that it's kind of been begrudging progress forward on getting this Halifax from underwater, that's the problem. So this is a glassy water condition in Sweden where the Halifax is. It's a real pain in the you-know-what. Now, we did recover 2 Merlin engines from the Halifax underwater, and as you know, the Merlin engine was mainly used on the Lancaster, but the early Halifaxes had Merlins also. So this is an early model Halifax, but the airframe is the same, and beggars can't be choosers. If you don't know where you're going to get airframe for a Halifax, you take the structure the way you get. You're going to have to rebuild it anyways, and then you make sure it's modified to the Halifax that can take the Bristol Hercules engines. And there is the commander of the RCAF. He was in Sweden. He's second from the left, Lieutenant General Mike Hood. He's since retired, but we're explaining and showing him our treasures that we pulled out of 50 feet. So you always, when things come from underwater, 73 years, and there's some salt in the water, and this is brackish water, you never let your pieces of an airframe get dry. You always put them in a freshwater bath to start with, and then you get the salt out of the metal before you start working with it. So, but that was a good day where we had the commander of the RCAF come in, and he's agreed, well, he and his successor have agreed, Carl, you get all the Halifax that you can from the site, and we will haul it back to Canada for you in RCAF transports. And there's a rudder. We found a rudder of the Halifax laying just under the sand, and we couldn't move it. We couldn't move this rudder. You know why? It's attached to a great big assembly that's under the sand. So we plotted it, we know where it is. We've developed a giant underwater vacuum cleaner that uses water to suck the sand up and deposit it a distance away. And those are all things that we're working with. There's the system. So you have the big pump up on the barge, and it pumps high volume of water down to a metal nozzle jet. And the Venturi effect, the suction for the nozzle jet comes from shooting the water by the opening. So those of you that are into physics and science, you'll know the giant vacuum cleaner that's going to pull up or take the sand away is going to be using a Venturi effect, and the Halifax is anywhere from 1 to 3 meters under the sand. So you know how many cubic yards of sand we've got to move. Now, when it comes time to lift big sections of the Halifax, we have Patrick's boat, which is right near the harbor where we bring the stuff in, and he's agreed to bring his motorized barge out to the site and lift up the big chunks of Halifax. The Halifax is not entirely in one piece. It hit hard on the water and is pre-disassembled. But anyways, we've got this boat, and that's going to cost about, I would say, $1,200–1,500 a day to use this boat, and that's a rock bottom price that we got from Patrick. And you can see our lead diver, Jan Christensen. We're trying to get better deals out of him, so we hooked him up to the hydraulic crane and lifted him up, and then we tried tickling him to get a better price. But anyways, Jan is just goofing around there. So you can see we've got some good tools. There's the crane extended boom showing what we can do. And obviously, you know, we can be lifting big sections of Halifax using that rig. But remember, we have to get everything uncovered first and then have it stockpiled and plotted so we can lift it. Now, the new addition, because of the, remember I told you the diving boats were small and the waves get big? You need a big boat in big waves to be able to continue your diving. And I just arranged this week that Gustav has this 50-foot rebuilt British tugboat in Denmark, and he's agreed to come over a week at a time to Sweden and anchor over the Halifax so that the divers can dive from his tugboat, and it can sleep 6. It has its own galley, and we are self-contained over the site if we wish to, which is better than using the standard size diving boats. And this tugboat used to cruise up and down the Thames River in London and do all the tugboat work in London. So, but I've been out on it a couple of times, and so Gustav has said, yes, I would like to help you. So that's what's coming up. That's the new boat on the Halifax block. Okay, so there's, as I explained, there's everything we've got. The stuff in yellow is stuff that I've located, but I haven't wheeled and dealed for it yet. And so I'll be continually searching for stuff, but you can see we've got the core of a Halifax. We've got 7 engines to make 4 runners. We've got the tail turret, we've got the nose turret. Hopefully I can color in those propeller blades soon, because I'll be going to England to inspect those Halifax propeller blades. What I've done over the past 2 to 3 years is I've gone to everyone that's got salvageable Halifax propeller hubs, and I've wheeled and dealed and traded, and all of the machine parts inside that propeller are so rare that I've been able to acquire the internals of the propeller hub so we can build 4 propeller hubs when the time comes. So that's the beginning of a salvage recovery of a propeller hub. That is, I have a machinist, Peter Grieve in Leeds. He makes me the substitute parts out of steel that are not authentic Halifax. What we do is we take the hub apart, we take out the authentic parts that are going to be needed in Nanton, and we put steel substitutes in then we put the hubs back together and give them back to the owner so they look the same before we took them apart. So some people don't want to give up 100% of their parts, but they are willing to, as long as I can convince them with my Nanton violin. I can get them to help us out. And there's what we salvaged out of that propeller hub. All the bearings, all the fittings, everything you need to rebuild a propeller hub came out of there, and we put in substitutes. Sorry folks, Canadian Tire doesn't carry these propeller hubs. So, if you guys think that there's moss growing on the north edge of a southbound Carl, that's not true. And so here's what I'm doing. I'm leaving tomorrow night, going to London Heathrow. I'll be arriving at 10 in the morning. Then I'm taking a hire van. You can see London Heathrow is at the very south end of the map. I'm going up to Oxford to inspect the Halifax propeller blades that don't exist. Everybody's been telling me you can't find Halifax propeller blades that fit a Bristol Hercules engine like this one here. Well, I found some. So I'll be wheeling and dealing on Monday afternoon on these. Now you see I'm going up to Coventry, up to the north, and up there they have an Avro Shackleton. And a Shackleton is like it's kind of like a younger brother of a Lancaster, and the wheels and brakes and axles for an Avro Shackleton fit a Lancaster and fit a Halifax. And they're giving us two very good condition wheels, brakes, and axles out of their Shackleton parts. Those are 400 pounds each for each brake. And so I'll be picking those up with my hire van and going to East Kirkby. See up in the way top of the map, East Kirkby, that is the home of Jane, the other running Lancaster in England, and that's called the Lincoln Aviation Heritage Center, and they have already equipped their Lancaster with Avro Shackleton wheels, brakes, and axles. So they're going to inspect these for us, and then once they give us the green light, we will ship them here, and then we will convert our Lancaster and rebuild our Halifax wheels, brakes, and axles using these. Plus we have other parts coming too. Now, once I leave East Kirkby, I've got to travel straight south, and you see that little spot there called Sandy? It's just right here. Anyways, that's the warehouse where I keep all the Halifax parts that I've been able to acquire for the Halifax rebuild. And there's many cowlings, propeller hubs, oil coolers for the Bristol Hercules engines, all the stuff that I've been able to acquire over the past 4 or 5 years. As we move forward on the Halifax project, they're there. And I'm loading up a 4 foot by 4 foot by 4 foot crate with about 500 pounds of parts, and I'll be shipping them from London Heathrow to Calgary to be brought down to Nanton. So these are all things that you have to do. And now, that's what I'm doing in England. Now, I found when I went over with Peter, the carpenter in Nanton, he took me to his hometown in Holland, and then I found out there was a museum in Holland had 2 Bristol Hercules engines with propellers still on them. And this is a belly landing and in Holland during the war. So here is, I went to inspect the engines, and there's the propeller hubs on the front. Now the engines are cool as artifacts, but I don't have much hair left, and I think a lot of it left for me trying to find propeller hubs for Halifaxes. And so there's the first engine, and you can see its sister to the left, and that's the sister engine on the left, and you can see that's gold to them their eyes. And Richard DeBoer and I know, yes. because it's really hard to find stuff like that. So that's what, in October, I'll be going to Amsterdam Schiphol Airport. I'll be staying at a local bed and breakfast, and they are allowing me, we are trading some Lancaster radios to them for the propeller hubs that are on the front of those two engines. And why? Why would we do this? Why would we bust our buns here at Nanton Bomber Command Museum and Halifax 57 Rescue? It's for these guys. These guys here, these young guys, probably the oldest guy there is probably about 25. They only had one chance in 4 of finishing 30 missions, and they still went. So those are the things that I was thinking about. Today at the ceremony for our Vimy Ridge tree and the dedication of the Vimy Ridge bench, those are symbols of Canadian honor, excellence, and sacrifice. And if I had to choose one airplane, if I had to go from World War I and what symbolizes our excellence, yes, it could be that in France or that comes from the battlefields of France. But I would say, and it would be a wonderful debate over a cool one, is that the Halifax could be taken as one of the best symbols of Canadian excellence, sacrifice, and honor from World War II. And remember what I said, the Canadians had the lowest loss rate in combat in all of Bomber Command, and they had the highest serviceability rate. And if the Canadians used an airplane that started with an H 70% of the time, what do you need sitting beside that beautiful dam buster out there? So that's why we do this. And you know, it wouldn't be possible if I didn't have the Jim Blondeaus, if I didn't have the Clint Causeys, if I didn't have the Bruce Finleys, if I didn't have the Doug Fletchers, if I didn't have all these diehards that keep supporting us, the project might die. But it's not dying, because there are patriots out there. And what I'd like to just offer to you folks is, if you would consider supporting the Bomber Command Museum, the Halifax Project, or directly to Halifax 57 Rescue, we can put together a Halifax right beside our lake. But I gotta keep going, and you guys, you can join me, but we're gonna do this. And Halifax 57 Rescue, we're really, really determined, and I just see it as being an honorable calling. If you're a red-blooded Canadian, you need to chase Halifaxes, and you need to have one in your museum.